welcome back. Today, we're diving deep into Unit 8, Topic 7, Resistance to Power Structures. After 1900, this is a crucial topic that shows how people fought back against empires, dictatorships, and injustice all over the globe. So, grab your notebooks, and let's get ready to ace that exam. First, let's set the stage. The 20th century was a time of immense change. While empires and powerful states tried to maintain control, their authority was constantly being challenged. These challenges came in many forms, from nonviolent protests to armed struggle. We're going to break down some of the most significant examples. Let's start with resistance to political authority. Think about the big players here. In the Soviet Union, despite the government's immense power, dissent simmered beneath the surface. Intellectuals like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, with his book The Gulag Archipelago, exposed the brutal reality of the labor camps. His work, and that of many others, chipped away at the legitimacy of the Soviet regime, inspiring both internal and external opposition. It showed the world that even in the most totalitarian states, the human spirit of resistance can't be completely extinguished. Now, let's shift our focus to Latin America. In Chile, the story of Augusto Pinochet's rise to power in 1973 is a stark example of a U.S.-backed coup that overthrew a democratically elected socialist government. Pinochet's military dictatorship was ruthless, characterized by disappearances, torture, and the suppression of all political opposition. But resistance didn't die, it went underground. Mothers of the disappeared marched silently, demanding answers. Musicians composed protest songs. Eventually, international pressure and domestic discontent led to a plebiscite in 1988, where the Chilean people bravely voted no to continuing his rule. This was a monumental victory for democracy, fueled by years of persistent, courageous resistance. Another key figure in Latin American resistance was Francisco Franco in Spain. After winning the Spanish Civil War, Franco established a fascist dictatorship that lasted for decades. His regime was repressive, crushing regional identities, particularly in Catalonia and the Basque Country. Resistance took many forms. From armed struggle by groups like ETA to the quiet preservation of banned languages and cultures. When Franco died in 1975, Spain transitioned to democracy. But the legacy of this long period of resistance shaped its modern political landscape. In Africa, the fight against authoritarianism was often intertwined with the struggle for independence and post-colonial stability. Take Idi Amin in Uganda. His reign of terror in the 1970s was horrific, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Resistance was incredibly dangerous, but it existed. Exiled Ugandans organized and, eventually, with the help of neighboring Tanzania, Amin's brutal regime was overthrown. This highlights how both internal and external forces often had to combine to topple a violent dictator. So, we've covered resistance to political authority. But what about economic resistance? The 20th century also saw major challenges to the global economic order. Think about the rise of economic imperialism, where powerful nations and corporations exerted control over developing countries. In response, many newly independent states in Africa and Asia advocated for a new international economic order. They argued for fairer trade terms, greater control over their own natural resources, and an end to economic exploitation by former colonial powers. While this movement didn't fully achieve all its goals, it was a powerful statement of resistance against neo-colonial economic structures. Now, let's talk about one of the most powerful forms of resistance: nonviolence. When you hear nonviolent resistance, who's the first person you think of? For most, it's Mahatma Gandhi. His philosophy of satyagraha, or truth force, was the bedrock of the Indian independence movement. Through actions like the Salt March and widespread boycotts of British goods, Gandhi mobilized millions of Indians. He showed that you could challenge a powerful empire without firing a single shot. His methods proved that moral authority could be a more potent weapon than military might, inspiring countless movements around the world, and that inspiration spread directly to the United States. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was deeply influenced by Gandhi's philosophy. He became the face of the American civil rights movement, advocating for an end to racial segregation and discrimination through nonviolent means. The Montgomery bus boycott, the sit-ins at segregated lunch counters, and the March on Washington were all masterful applications of nonviolent direct action. These acts exposed the brutal injustice of the Jim Crow system to the entire world, and forced the federal government to pass landmark legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The power of nonviolence was also seen in the fight against apartheid in South Africa. Nelson Mandela, while initially involved with armed struggle, became a global symbol of resistance during his 27 years in prison. The anti-apartheid movement, both inside and outside South Africa, used a combination of protests, international boycotts, and economic sanctions. The famous Soweto uprising, started by students protesting the forced use of Afrikaans in schools, showed the world the courage of young South Africans. The sustained global pressure eventually became too much for the apartheid regime to bear, leading to Mandela's release and the first free and fair elections in the nation's history. Of course, not all resistance was nonviolent. Sometimes groups felt that armed struggle was their only option. Let's look at some examples of that. In Peru, a group called the Shining Path emerged in the 1980s. It was a communist militant group that aimed to overthrow the government through a people's war. Their methods were incredibly violent, leading to a long and bloody internal conflict that cost tens of thousands of lives. While they sought to upend the existing power structure, their brutality ultimately turned the population against them and they failed to achieve their goals. The Shining Path serves as a cautionary tale about how violent methods can often lead to more suffering and fail to create a better society. On the other hand, let's consider the African National Congress in South Africa. For decades, the ANC pursued nonviolent protest, but after the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, where police killed 69 unarmed protesters, they decided that nonviolence alone was not enough. They formed a military wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, or Spear of the Nation. While Nelson Mandela was a leader in this, their actions were primarily focused on sabotage against state infrastructure, not targeting civilians. This illustrates a key point. Sometimes organizations can have both a political, nonviolent wing and an armed wing, adopting a multi-pronged strategy to fight against an oppressive state. We also see resistance taking shape in response to global conflicts. The protest movements against the Vietnam War, especially in the United States, were massive. Students, artists, and everyday citizens took to the streets to challenge their government's involvement in a war they saw as unjust and immoral. This anti-war movement created a huge cultural and political divide within the country and was a major factor in the eventual withdrawal of U.S. troops. It demonstrated that citizens in a democracy could mobilize to directly challenge and change their nation's foreign policy. Finally, let's look at the end of the Cold War. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 wasn't just about politics. It was a massive act of popular resistance. For years, people in Eastern Bloc countries like Poland, with its Solidarity movement, and Czechoslovakia with its Velvet Revolution, had been pushing for more freedom. These were largely nonviolent movements that showed the growing cracks in the Soviet Union's control. When the East German government faltered, it was ordinary people who took hammers and chisels to the wall, physically tearing down a symbol of oppression. It was a powerful televised finale, 2 decades of quiet and courageous resistance. So, let's recap what we've covered. After 1900, resistance to power structures was diverse and global. We saw nonviolent movements led by figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. achieve incredible success. We saw political dissent challenging totalitarian regimes in the USSR and military dictatorships in Chile and Spain. We saw armed struggles with varying outcomes, from the ANC in South Africa to the Shining Path in Peru. And we saw popular movements that changed the course of global events, like the anti-Vietnam War protests and the fall of the Berlin Wall when you're studying for your exam. Think about the context. What were these groups resisting? What methods did they use? Were they successful? And what were the long-term consequences of their actions? Being able to compare and contrast these different movements, for example, comparing the nonviolent methods of MLK with the armed struggle of the ANC, will really help you build strong arguments for your essays. This topic is all about human agency, the power of individuals and groups to shape their own destiny even in the face of overwhelming force. It's a testament to the enduring desire for freedom, justice, and self-determination. That's all for our review of Unit 8, Topic 7. I hope this was helpful for you. Keep up the great work with your studies. You're doing an amazing job. Remember to like this video and get ready for Topic 8, the end of the Cold War, up next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.